Good evening. My name is Miles Davenport, and I can tell you the exact second my marriage died. Not the day we signed papers, not the night I packed a suitcase, but one ordinary Saturday in our Seattle living room, with candlelight on the table and my wife laughing louder than anyone else in the room. 8 of her friends were there. I was in the kitchen, holding a bag of ice, close enough to hear every word and too far away to pretend I hadn't. By the time I walked back in, the man they were laughing about and the man carrying the drinks were no longer the same person. Do you know what it feels like to hear your wife describe you as a joke and realize she's been practicing the lines for an audience? I wish I could tell you I walked back into that living room numb or calm or collected in some heroic way. The truth is simpler and uglier. I walked in terrified that my face would give me away. Terrified that one of those 8 women, Rowan's closest friends from her college years, would look up from her wine glass and see what I just heard written across my expression. They sat in a loose circle on our cream-colored sectional, the one Rowan was so proud of. Candles flickered on the coffee table, reflecting off half-empty bottles of red. Music hummed low, something Rowan picked because it made the house feel grown up. Everything about the room looked curated, warm, inviting. I stood in the doorway holding a bag of melting ice like an idiot, trying to remember how to breathe. Rowan didn't notice me at first. She was mid-story, hands moving as she talked, her voice bright and sharp. Jessica laughed too loudly at something Rowan said. Amanda leaned in, eager for the next detail. Linda Kensley. God, Linda, tilted her head with that hungry little smile she wore when she sensed drama. I wondered how many times they'd done this before. How many evenings like this had unfolded while I refilled glasses, cooked dinner, or stepped into another room for a moment too long. Rowan turned finally, flashing me a quick smile. A hostess smile, the kind you give a waiter refilling your water. Oh, thanks, babe. Just set it there. Babe, as if 5 minutes earlier she hadn't compared me to a clueless teenager fumbling through bad porn. As if she hadn't acted out the way I breathe when I'm close, exaggerating it for laughs. As if she hadn't said she sometimes thinks about grocery lists just to get through the moment. I poured the ice into the bucket and kept my eyes low. Someone asked Rowan a question, something about how bad is bad. The room shifted toward her again. I faded into the edges, a ghost in my own house. You know, Rowan said with a soft sigh, I try, I really do, but some things just don't improve. Laughter, tinkling, polite, eager laughter. My throat closed. I felt heat crawl up the back of my neck. A crawling, tightening humiliation I didn't have a name for yet. The kind that makes you grip the nearest surface just to feel anchored. Sabrina wasn't there that night. Maybe that's why I managed to hold myself together. She would have seen through me instantly. The others didn't. They barely glanced my way. I floated through the next hour, refilling wine, carrying plates, answering small talk I didn't hear. I caught pieces of Rowan's voice rising over the others, another joke, another anecdote delivered with that same careless confidence. She was performing, and they loved her for it. Meanwhile, something inside me pulled loose, thread by thread. Near the end of the night, I stepped outside to take out the trash. The air was cold enough to sting, the sky heavy with Seattle's usual low clouds. I stood at the edge of the driveway and let the quiet hit me. That was when the realization settled in. Quiet, heavy, unshakable. She didn't love me. No, that wasn't quite right. She didn't respect me. And a marriage without respect isn't a marriage. It's a stage, and I was the punchline. When the last guest finally left, Rowan kissed my cheek in passing, already scrolling through her phone. Good party, huh? Everyone had fun. Fun, sure. I nodded, because that was easier than speaking. My voice didn't feel like something I owned anymore. She went upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the counter where I'd stood earlier, listening to my own dismantling. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't break anything. I just stood there, realizing the man I had been, kind, patient, hopeful, had stayed behind with the melting ice. And whatever was left of me was walking into unfamiliar territory, one quiet breath at a time. Sabrina's text came the next morning, right as I was standing at the kitchen counter, pretending to drink coffee. I'd slept maybe an hour. My head felt thick, like someone had stuffed it with wet cotton. Sabrina Cade, can we talk? It's important. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Sabrina wasn't part of the drunken chorus last night. She wasn't even there, but she was Rowan's closest friend, the one who usually balanced her out. I typed back before I could think too much. Sure. When? Sabrina. Now, if you can. Rowan was upstairs getting ready for a yoga class. She didn't ask what I was doing with my day. She didn't look at me long enough to notice anything off. I grabbed my jacket and left the house feeling like a man who'd misplaced something vital. Keys, wallet, heart, something. Brewhaven was quiet for once. Sunday afternoons were usually chaotic, but not today. A couple sat by the window whispering over a laptop. A guy in a beanie typed furiously in the corner. The barista hummed as she wiped down the counter. Sabrina was at a small table in the back, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. She looked up as I approached, and the guilt on her face made my stomach drop. Miles, she said softly. Hearing my name like that, careful, almost apologetic, was enough to make the tightness in my chest sharpen. I sat across from her. What's going on? She didn't answer right away. She stirred her latte even though the foam had already dissolved. Her eyes stayed down. I couldn't sleep last night, she finally said. Not after what the girls told me. My jaw clenched. I didn't want to hear it again, not from another mouth. I know what Rowan said, I said quietly. I heard all of it. Sabrina closed her eyes like that hurt her too. When she opened them, something steely flickered under the sadness. She had no right, she said. None. And this wasn't the first time. The words landed like a punch. I swallowed. How long? At least 6 months, she whispered. Maybe longer. Every time we meet up, she unloads. About you. Always about you. She looked at me then, really looked, and I felt exposed in a way I hadn't expected. Not ashamed, but seen. She makes it sound like you're some kind of joke, Sabrina said, anger tightening her voice, like she's stuck with someone beneath her. The humiliation I thought had peaked last night surged again, raw and bitter. It was one thing to be mocked once. It was another to learn it had been a recurring performance. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice low. Because someone should, she said, meeting my eyes. Because you don't deserve it. And because Rowan isn't going to stop. She enjoys the attention too much. I looked away, focusing on a crack in the wooden table. I didn't think she hated me. She doesn't, Sabrina said quickly. She's insecure, competitive. She uses you to look stronger in front of people. She hesitated. And honestly, you're too patient, too forgiving. She knows you won't fight back. A warmth rose in my throat, sharp and painful. I wasn't sure if it was anger or grief. Then Sabrina said something that shifted the whole gravity of the conversation. And for what it's worth, I've always thought you were better than the way she talks about you. Her voice softened. A lot better. I lifted my eyes. She held my gaze without flinching, without pity, just an honesty I wasn't used to. For a moment, my world steadied. We talked for nearly 2 hours about Rowan, about the marriage, about the ways someone can chip at you without ever raising their voice. Sabrina didn't defend Rowan out of loyalty, the way most best friends would. She told the truth, even when it made her uncomfortable. When we finally stepped outside, the Seattle air was cool and bright, and I felt a strange combination of exhaustion and clarity. "Miles?" Sabrina said as I turned to leave. "Yeah?" "You're not the problem," she said. "Please believe that." No one had said something like that to me in a long time. Back in the office the next day, Ethan noticed everything I tried to hide. He leaned against my cubicle wall, arms crossed. "Rough weekend?" I gave a strained laugh. "You could say that." "You're somewhere else today," he said. "Not just distracted, distant." He wasn't judging, just observing, and somehow that made it worse. "I'm fine," I said. He shook his head. "Man, nobody who says I'm fine looks like you look right now." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not without unraveling. He left it at that, but his eyes lingered on me longer than usual, like he was watching a man standing too close to an edge. When I got home that evening, Rowan was on the couch scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up. "Where were you?" she asked. "Coffee with a friend." She didn't ask who, didn't care, just nodded absently and kept scrolling. The same woman who had demolished me for entertainment 24 hours earlier couldn't be bothered to look me in the eye. That was when something inside me shifted again. Quiet, controlled, irreversible. She didn't know it yet. But the distance between us had just become a canyon. I didn't plan to see Sabrina again so soon. I told myself the coffee meeting was a one-time thing, a necessary conversation after a blow I still couldn't fully process. But 2 days later, on a gray Tuesday morning, I found myself walking toward Brewhaven before work, almost on autopilot. She was already there, curled into the same corner seat, hair pulled into a loose knot, fingertips wrapped around a steaming mug. When she saw me, her face softened, like she'd been hoping but didn't want to assume. "Rough night?" she asked. "It's been a rough everything," I said. That made her smile in this small, sad way, like she knew exactly what that meant. We talked again, about nothing and everything, about work, about weekend routines, about the things you only admit to someone when your guard is already cracked. She didn't pry. She didn't perform. She just listened, fully, like every word mattered. It shouldn't have felt like oxygen, but it did. By Thursday, meeting for coffee felt natural, familiar, dangerous maybe, but I wasn't chasing anything inappropriate. Not then. I wasn't touching her. I wasn't flirting. I wasn't seeking an escape from Rowan. I was seeking a version of myself I could still respect. Sabrina asked real questions. She remembered the answers. She laughed in the right places, soft, genuine, not the brittle, sharp laughter I'd heard from that living room full of women. And I found myself smiling back in ways I hadn't in years. "Can I say something without you taking it the wrong way?" she asked once, stirring her drink. "Probably," I said. "You seem like someone who tries too hard to carry everything alone." I let out a breath. "I don't know any other way." "Maybe that's the problem," she murmured. Friday afternoon, she mentioned casually that she thought I'd look good with shorter sides, a haircut that sharpened the jawline. I laughed it off at first. The next afternoon, without thinking too hard, I booked an appointment. It wasn't about impressing her. Not really. It was about hearing someone notice me, see me, want me to feel like myself again. When I walked into the office Monday, Ethan stared for a second too long. "New look," he said. "Yeah." "Trying something different?" "Just felt like it." "You never do something just because," he said with a raised brow. I didn't answer, mostly because he was right. Rowan noticed too, but not in the way I expected. She eyed me while I chopped vegetables in the kitchen that evening, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. "You cut your hair," she said. "Yeah." "You didn't tell me." "It was a haircut, Rowan, not a medical procedure." She frowned, not at the words, but at the tone. I almost never spoke to her like that. For years, I'd been careful, measured, gentle. Now I didn't have the energy to smooth my edges. Later that night, she sniffed the air when I walked past her in the hallway. "Is that new cologne?" I didn't look at her. I liked it. The truth, Sabrina had mentioned it in passing. "Cedarwood fits you," she'd said, grounded but sharp. Rowan watched me with a look I couldn't quite decipher. Suspicion, maybe, or fear, or the realization that something she'd always taken for granted was shifting under her feet. By the end of the week, the changes, not dramatic, but visible, began to unsettle her more. She lingered by the bathroom door when my phone buzzed. She asked who I was texting. She slid questions into conversation like tiny needles. "Who were you talking to?" "Why'd you step outside?" "You're smiling at your phone a lot lately." I never lied. I just didn't give her the answers she wanted. A friend. A call. Something funny. She hated those answers because they forced her to fill in the blanks, and Rowan's mind always filled blanks with worst-case scenarios. But she stayed silent, too proud to confront me directly. What surprised me was how calm I felt. Detached, observing her panic the way someone watches lightning from far away. Dangerous, but not close enough to burn. The truth is, I didn't want revenge. Not then. Not yet. I wanted her to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Uncertainty. The kind she'd injected into me without hesitation. The kind she'd amplified for an audience. If she was losing me, even a little, I wanted her to realize it wasn't sudden. It was sewn by her own hand, thread by thread, insult by insult, until the fabric finally tore. One night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat alone in the dim kitchen, staring at my phone. Sabrina had sent a simple message. "Hope today wasn't too heavy. You deserve some light." Rowan hadn't said anything close to that in years. I didn't respond right away. I let the thought settle in my chest, warm but heavy, and understood something with a clarity that scared me. I was slipping away from my wife, not because of Sabrina, but because Rowan had pushed me toward the edge and then dared me to fall. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to climb back. Rowan's shift didn't happen all at once. It crept in quietly, the way Seattle fog rolls over the sound, soft at first, then dense enough to hide the street in front of you. It began with small things. A pause when my phone buzzed. A glance that lingered a second too long. A question that sounded casual but wasn't. "Who's texting you so late?" "No one important." "You're smiling at the screen." "Am I?" Every time I gave her a neutral answer, she reacted like I'd slapped her with ambiguity. Rowan hated ambiguity. In courtrooms and in life, she needed clarity she could control. And for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't have clarity about me. One morning, I stepped out to take a call from Ethan about a server issue. When I came back inside, Rowan was standing in the hallway holding my jacket. Her hand was inside the pocket. "I was checking if you took my parking pass," she said too quickly. We both knew she was lying. We both pretended not to notice. Later that week, she accidentally picked up my phone instead of hers. She didn't even bother to look embarrassed when I caught her holding it at the wrong angle, waiting for a notification that never came. Because Sabrina and I were careful. Signal messages that disappeared, short calls at odd hours, enough distance to stay technical, not intimate. But Rowan wasn't reacting to evidence. She was reacting to absence, of certainty, of dominance, of the version of me she could always predict, and that terrified her. One night I came home late from work, not from Sabrina, not from anything risky, just late. The office had a deployment running, and Ethan needed help troubleshooting. Rowan was sitting at the dining table when I walked in. No TV on, no music, just her and a half-finished glass of wine. "You didn't answer my texts," she said. "I was busy. I sent 4 miles. I saw them. And I was busy," I repeated. Her jaw clenched. Rowan wasn't used to repeating herself. She wasn't used to feeling, well, anything she couldn't spin into control. "What's going on with you lately?" she asked, voice sharp but quiet. "You're different." I shrugged. "Maybe I am." "Because of work?" "Sure," I said, knowing full well that wasn't the answer she was really after. She set the wine glass down harder than necessary. "I feel like you're hiding something." I met her eyes, steady. "Like what?" She didn't have an answer. She only had fear dressed up as suspicion. And beneath all that, something else was happening. Something internal, something slow and cold and irreversible. My resentment had stopped burning. That scared me more than anger ever could. Anger means you still care enough to react. Resentment means you've given up trying to fix what broke. But the coldness, the quiet withdrawal, that meant something in me had started rebuilding without her. Sabrina sensed it too. At one of our regular coffee meetups, she studied me over the rim of her mug. "You're whiter in the face than usual," she said. "Has she been pushing harder?" "She's watching me," I said, "and she doesn't even know what she's looking for." Sabrina hesitated. "Do you want her to find something?" "No," I said. And then, after a beat, "But I don't want to save her from the feeling either." She nodded slowly, almost sadly. "That's how it starts, you know." "How what starts?" "When someone hurts you so badly that the only thing you want is for them to finally feel something you felt, even if it's just a fraction." Her voice wasn't judgmental, it was weary. She knew more about fighting for a dead relationship than she'd ever admitted. Meanwhile, Ethan kept watching me at work like I was a system throwing warning errors. "Man, you're not right," he said gently one afternoon. "You're checked out." I rubbed my temple. "I'm fine." "You're not," he said. "You've been staring at that same line of code for 15 minutes. I hadn't realized. He leaned closer. "Whatever this is, be careful. People do reckless things when they're hurt." "I'm not doing anything reckless." "Not yet." I didn't answer because answering would have forced me to look directly at the truth. The man I was becoming, quiet, deliberate, emotionally detached, was more dangerous than any version of me that reacted with anger. That night, Rowan crawled into bed after me and lay stiff beside me, facing the opposite direction. I could feel the tension radiating from her body, tight as a pulled wire. She whispered into the dark, "I miss how we used to be." A month ago, those words would have broken me. Tonight, they barely registered. I stared at the ceiling and said nothing. I didn't have the energy to pretend we were still recoverable. I didn't have the kindness left to shield her from the consequences of what she'd done. Somewhere between that first laugh in the living room and this quiet war in our bedroom, I'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. And the frightening part? I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. When Rowan suggested hosting her circle again 3 weeks after the first disaster, I felt something inside me shift, slow, deliberate, almost clinical, a door clicking shut. She framed it casually, like it was an annual tradition she didn't want to skip twice, but I could see the real reason flicker behind her eyes. She wanted to reassert control, to prove everything in our marriage was fine, to silence whatever anxiety had started eating at her. And I let her. I didn't protest. I didn't question. I simply said, "Sure," and watched her try and fail to hide her relief. She didn't know I already had a plan. The night of the gathering arrived under the kind of sky Seattle is known for. Gray, heavy, low enough to feel like it was pressing on the roof of our house. Inside, the living room was warm again, lights dimmed, wine bottles uncorked. Rowan had spent the afternoon arranging charcuterie boards with meticulous precision, as if perfect placement of a slice of brie could stitch our life back together. By the time the first guests walked through the door, I was already sitting on the couch beside Sabrina. Close. Closer than necessary. We weren't touching, not really. Just the occasional brush of her fingertips on my arm when she made a point. The kind of touch innocent enough to deny, but meaningful enough to be noticed. And Rowan noticed. Immediately. She kept glancing at us between greetings, her smile slipping each time her eyes caught the side of my body angled towards Sabrina. The way we leaned slightly together, like people who shared a rhythm Rowan no longer understood. "Wow, you two look cozy," Jessica chirped, stepping in behind Rowan. I didn't look away from Sabrina when I answered. We were just talking, which was true, but everything about the scene was crafted to unsettle. Rowan's jaw tensed before she forced another brittle smile and moved to pour wine. As more guests arrived, Sabrina and I stayed in our pocket of conversation, laughing quietly, leaning in, sharing inside jokes that weren't real but sounded like they were. Every shift in my posture was intentional. Every smirk held a purpose. I wasn't trying to hurt Rowan. I was giving her a reflection of the uncertainty she'd carved into me, a mirror she couldn't escape. Her smiles grew louder. Her laugh became sharp around the edges. She refilled her glass too often, too quickly. Rowan wasn't a sloppy drinker, but tonight she was close. Linda whispered something to her by the kitchen island, eyes flicking toward me and Sabrina. Rowan waved her off, pretending she didn't care. But she did. Her entire body gave it away. Dinner was served, pasta primavera, Caesar salad, garlic bread. The table felt smaller than usual, the air thick with the kind of tension polite people pretend not to notice. Conversations overlapped, messy and uneven, with everyone subtly aware that something was off, though no one dared name it. I sat across from Rowan. She didn't look at me, not once. Instead, she threw herself into conversations with the others, but her laugh kept breaking early, landing flat. She watched Sabrina and me between sentences, nervous and hungry for reassurance she couldn't reach. Ethan's warning echoed faintly in my head. People do reckless things when they're hurt. But I wasn't the reckless one tonight. Rowan was. She lifted her third glass of wine, swirling it, staring into it like she hoped the answer to everything was waiting at the bottom. Her discomfort wasn't loud yet, but it was building, like a fault line tightening beneath the table. About halfway through dinner, Amanda's voice cut through the chatter. "My sister's getting divorced," she said with a sigh. 10 years. I guess marriage is just hard. The table murmured in agreement. Jessica added, "Relationships take work. They're not like movies." I felt it coming before Rowan even opened her mouth. I could see it in the way she straightened her spine, in the slight tilt of her head, the same posture she used in court when she sensed an opening. "Well," Rowan said, setting down her fork with a dramatic sigh. "Sometimes you just have to accept your partner has limitations." The table went still. "Limitations?" Jessica echoed. Rowan gave a tight smile. "Yes, things they aren't good at, things you have to live with." I didn't move, didn't blink, just let the words land. Across from me, Sabrina placed her fork down slowly, her expression tightening into something calm and dangerous. Rowan kept going, emboldened by her own voice. "Some people think they're amazing at things they're actually terrible at," she said. "And no matter what you do, they don't improve." A few of the women shifted in their seats. Linda gave a shaky laugh. Someone checked their phone. Mara pretended to need a napkin. It was the same script as the first party. Same tone, same cruel confidence, same dismissal of the person sitting right across from her. Except tonight, Rowan wasn't speaking into a room full of women ready to laugh with her. Tonight, Sabrina was here. Tonight, Rowan was performing on a stage she didn't realize had changed. Tonight, her humiliation was no longer a secret wound. It was a fuse she was lighting herself. And I sat there in absolute silence, letting her strike the match. Rowan didn't realize she'd crossed the line until she was already sprinting past it, words tumbling out of her like she couldn't stop, like humiliating me was the one talent she could count on to hold a room. She took another sip of wine, emboldened by the silence she misread as invitation. "I mean, honestly," she said, waving her hand as if the matter bored her. "You try to guide some men, but they're just oblivious. They think they're impressive. They think they know what they're doing." She laughed, sharp and humorless. "But they're not. Not even close." My pulse didn't spike this time. It slowed. I'd heard my wife mock me before, 3 weeks earlier, in this same room, with these same people. But tonight, everything felt colder. More calculated. A rerun of cruelty she thought still worked. Sabrina leaned back in her chair, watching Rowan with the kind of composed stillness that always meant danger. Her eyes didn't flicker. Her jaw didn't move. She looked like a fuse waiting for the flame. Jessica cleared her throat. Maybe we should talk about something." But Rowan cut her off. "What? I'm just being honest. It's not like my husband doesn't know he's—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Limited." A second of stillness. A second where no one breathed. Then Sabrina spoke. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but edged like a blade. "Are you sure," she said, "that you're the one who gets to make that judgment?" Rowan froze. The entire table froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" Rowan asked, her tone brittle. Sabrina tilted her head slightly. "It means maybe you're not the best evaluator of your husband's abilities." A flush crept across Rowan's neck. "Sabrina, don't start." "I'm not starting anything," Sabrina said calmly. "You brought this up. Again." Rowan's eyes flashed as she scanned the table, expecting support, but no one met her gaze. Not Jessica. Not Amanda. Not even Linda, who suddenly found her wine glass very interesting. Only I met her eyes, and I gave her nothing. Rowan swallowed hard. I'm just telling the truth. God, why is everyone so sensitive tonight? Sabrina's smile tightened. Funny. That's exactly what he could say about you. The words hit Rowan so hard she flinched. Excuse me? Sabrina leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, expression unbothered. Maybe the issue isn't him. Maybe the issue is you. A sharp inhale rippled from someone on Rowan's left. Rowan let out a shaky laugh. You're drunk. I've had half a glass, Sabrina said. I'm stone cold sober, which is why I can tell you this clearly. You've spent months tearing him down because it's easier than admitting the truth about your own shortcomings. Rowan's face drained of color. Shortcomings? What the hell are you implying? Sabrina didn't blink. That you're not nearly as good in bed as you pretend to be. A stunned silence swallowed the room whole. I could hear my heart beat. I could hear Rowan's, faster, louder, panicked. Her mask was cracking, and she knew it. How would you know anything about that? Rowan demanded, her voice trembling. Sabrina didn't hesitate. She simply reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Rowan stared at it like it was a weapon. What are you doing? She whispered. Sabrina placed the phone face down in the center of the table. The sound of it hitting the wood echoed like a gunshot. Showing you, she said, how I know. Her calmness was terrifying, controlled, surgical. Rowan's breath stuttered. No, you didn't. Sabrina's smile was thin. Didn't what? You wouldn't. Sabrina, tell me you didn't do anything with... She gestured wildly toward me. I stayed silent. Rowan looked around the table, pleading silently for someone to interrupt, someone to interfere, someone to save her from the direction this night was heading. No one moved. Jessica's face was pale. Amanda's hand was trembling. Linda's eyes were wide, horrified, as if she suddenly understood she'd helped build the stage for Rowan's downfall. Rowan reached for the phone, her fingers shaking so hard she nearly dropped it. Sabrina, if you show me anything, Why? Sabrina asked softly. Afraid of what you'll see? Rowan slammed her palm against the table. Show me, right now. Sabrina flipped the phone over with one deliberate motion, and Rowan made a sound I've never heard from her before, something between a gasp and a wail. She grabbed the phone, scrolling frantically, eyes widening with each swipe. Her breath turned into choked, broken bursts. Oh my God, no, this can't, Miles. She looked at me then, mascara smudged, fear and betrayal mixing into something raw and feral. Tell me this isn't real, she whispered. Tell me she's lying. Tell me you didn't do this. Her voice cracked on the last word. Everyone stared at me. Sabrina. Rowan. 8 women who had laughed at me weeks earlier. A room full of witnesses holding their breath. But I didn't move, didn't defend, didn't apologize. I simply watched my wife's world crumble the same way she'd shattered mine. Publicly, loudly, and with an audience. This was the moment everything shifted. The moment the stage lights flipped. The moment Rowan finally felt what it was like to be the punchline. And I still hadn't said a single word. Rowan's breathing turned erratic. Short, shallow pulls of air that made her shoulders jump. She clutched Sabrina's phone so tightly, her knuckles whitened, scrolling through message after message like she could force the meaning to change if she moved fast enough. Her voice fractured. No, this isn't possible. You two, how did... The room was silent except for the soft piano track Rowan had cued earlier, now playing like a cruel joke behind her unraveling. The same music she thought made her gatherings feel elegant. Sabrina didn't flinch. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't revel. She simply sat still, composed in a way that made everything around her feel chaotic by comparison. "I told you," she said quietly. "Maybe you're not the best judge of your husband." Rowan whipped her head toward her. "You slept with him?" Her voice shook so hard the words barely formed. Sabrina didn't answer. She didn't need to. The implication was already detonating. Linda covered her mouth. Jessica whispered, "Oh my God." Amanda looked like she wanted to disappear. Brielle was crying for no reason other than shock. And me? I sat in my chair, hands folded, spine straight, watching the implosion I had not stopped, and no longer wanted to stop. Rowan slammed the phone down on the table so forcefully the screen cracked. "Why?" she screamed, the sound sharp enough to split the air. "Why would you do this to me? To me?" I almost laughed. Almost. But I stayed still. She turned to me next, her face streaked with mascara, her lips trembling. "Miles, tell them this isn't real. Tell them she's twisting things. Tell them she's lying because she hates me. Tell them something." I looked at her. Really looked. At the woman who'd mocked me for sport. Who'd reduced me to a punchline in front of the same women staring at her now. Who'd used my vulnerabilities as entertainment. And Rowan saw something in my face, something final, something irreversible that made her step back like she'd been struck. You're not denying it," she whispered. I didn't speak. Silence was the only honest language left between us. Rowan's knees buckled, and she gripped the back of her chair for support. "You had an affair with my best friend," she said, louder now, her voice pitching into hysteria. "My best friend since college, the person I trusted most." Sabrina stood slowly, pushing her chair back with quiet grace. She walked around the table, not rushing, not dramatic, just steady, and came to stand behind me. Rowan's eyes followed every step, widening with every inch Sabrina moved closer. And then Sabrina placed her hand on my shoulder, a soft, confident gesture, possessive, unapologetic, deliberate, like she was staking a claim in front of every person in that room. Rowan's face collapsed. It was the look of someone watching the ground split open, beneath them. Sabrina leaned in, her hand firm, her voice soft enough that Rowan had to strain to hear, but every woman at that table still caught the words. "Actually," Sabrina said, her tone cutting through the room like a slow blade, "he's incredible." A gasp shot around the table. Someone dropped a fork. Someone else muttered, "Holy hell." Even the music seemed to falter. Rowan pressed a hand to her mouth, shaking violently. "Stop! Stop it! Stop it!" Her voice cracked on the last word, collapsing into something desperate and feral. She wasn't just crying. She was breaking. For a second, just a second, I felt the ghost of guilt flicker inside me. Then I remembered her laughter, her reenactments, her punchlines, the bruise she left on my dignity with every joke. And the guilt vanished. Rowan staggered backward, knocking into her chair. "How could you?" she cried. "How could either of you?" No one answered her. Sabrina's hand never left my shoulder, and as Rowan looked around the table, pleading for someone, anyone, to defend her, she realized what I had realized weeks earlier. No one laughs with the punchline once the joke has turned. Rowan's scream didn't sound human. It tore out of her like something feral, raw, scraped from the deepest part of her chest. She stumbled backward, knocking her wine glass to the floor. It shattered across the hardwood in a spray of red, like blood blooming on fresh snow. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The entire room seemed to tilt. Then everything erupted at once. Voices overlapping, chairs scraping, someone whispering, "Jesus Christ," another whispering, "Is this really happening?" Phones appeared in trembling hands, screens lighting up as if instinct demanded documentation of the wreckage. I watched it all through a strange sense of distance, like I was standing behind glass. Like none of this belonged to me anymore. Not the house, not the marriage, not the man I used to be. Rowan looked at me with eyes full of disbelief and something darker. "You betrayed me," she choked out. "You betrayed us." Us. Interesting choice of pronoun for a marriage she'd been publicly dissecting for sport. I didn't respond. Silence was my final boundary, the last thing I still owned. Sabrina kept her hand on my shoulder, not gentle, not comforting, but steady, confident. A statement more than a gesture. Rowan pointed at her with a shaking finger. "You were my best friend. 15 years, 15 goddamn years. And this is what you do to me?" Sabrina didn't look away. "You destroyed him long before I ever touched him." Rowan staggered. The accusation hit her with physical force. I didn't, her words broke. "I was venting. Everyone vents. That doesn't mean—" "It wasn't venting," Sabrina cut in. "It was cruelty." Rowan's face crumpled. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Linda let out a strangled noise, like she'd been holding her breath too long. We didn't know what to say, Rowan." "No," Sabrina corrected. "You didn't want to say anything. Because you all enjoyed the show." Every pair of eyes dropped to the table. Even Jessica stopped recording. Rowan turned back to me, mascara streaking down her cheeks, lips trembling as if she were physically fighting her own disbelief. "Miles, please, tell them she's exaggerating. Tell them you didn't actually—" Her voice cracked. "Tell me you didn't choose her over me." Choose? As if this were a choice. As if my loyalty hadn't already been worn down to bone long before Sabrina entered the picture. I looked at Rowan, not to hurt her, not to shame her, but because she was finally asking the right question, and she saw the truth in my face. Comprehension washed over her like cold water. "No," she whispered. "No, you can't mean that. You can't— Miles, say something." But I couldn't, because every word she had ever twisted, mocked, or weaponized sat like a bruise in my throat. Silence was the most honest answer I had left. Rowan let out a sob so sharp it startled the guests. She grabbed a handful of napkins, wiping her face with the desperation of someone trying to erase reality. "This is humiliating," she whispered. "Everyone is watching. Everyone." She scanned the room, seeing phones still raised. "Oh my God, they're recording this. Stop. Stop filming." No one listened. It was the same disregard she'd shown me weeks ago, when she'd mocked me without hesitation, without conscience, without love. The universe had simply turned the mirror around. She lunged toward Jessica's phone, grabbing at it. "Delete it! Now!" Jessica recoiled, muttering something about just trying to understand. But Rowan wasn't listening. Panic had taken over. She was shaking violently, her breath coming in uneven bursts. "This is my life," Rowan cried. "My marriage, my reputation, my friends. How could you? She pointed again at me, her finger trembling. "You were supposed to be on my side." I finally spoke, quiet, steady, without heat. "There stopped being sides the night you laughed at me." The room froze. Rowan's mouth opened, closed, opened again, like she was drowning in air she couldn't swallow. Sabrina's hand tightened on my shoulder, not for comfort, for clarity, for punctuation. "This isn't me taking him from you," she said. "This is you losing him." Rowan let out a broken, keening sound. The night unraveled completely. Guests whispered apologies as they gathered their coats, slipping out the door one by one, while Rowan collapsed into the nearest chair, shaking uncontrollably. The last bottle of wine sat uncorked on the table, the candles still burning, the food untouched. It looked like the aftermath of a party that had never really begun. As the final guest stepped outside, Rowan lifted her head, eyes red, voice barely functioning. "Is there anything left to save?" Her question wasn't angry now. It was small, frail, a plea from the ruins. I looked at the woman I had once loved with every quiet part of me, and realized the truth had arrived long before tonight. "No," I said, "there isn't." And for the first time, Rowan didn't argue. She just folded in on herself, like something inside her had finally given out. The marriage didn't end with shouting, or insults, or blame. It ended with a whisper, a collapse, a quiet acceptance of a truth we had both felt long before this night. We had broken each other long before Sabrina ever touched me. Rowan moved out the next afternoon. There was no fight, no negotiation, no dramatic plea at the doorway. She packed a single suitcase, grabbed her laptop bag, and walked out without looking back. The silence she left behind felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. A week earlier, she would have slammed doors, thrown accusations, demanded explanations. But now there was only a quiet surrender, the kind that comes when someone finally understands a battle is already lost. The house felt cavernous once she was gone. Too many chairs for one person. Too many untouched spaces. It didn't feel like freedom exactly, at least not at first. It felt like standing in the shell of a life I thought I was building, the echo of something that used to be warm. I kept walking into rooms expecting to see her, on the couch with her phone, at the counter organizing her planner, leaning on the kitchen island complaining about a coworker. But there was nothing, just walls and quiet. News of the dinner traveled faster than I expected. Seattle isn't a small city, but Rowan's circle talked and their circle talked, and by Monday, people at her firm were whispering in hallways. Linda called me, her voice tight with guilt and something close to fear. She apologized 3 times in a row, not because she cared about me, but because she finally realized how much she'd helped feed the very fire that burned Rowan alive in front of her friends. I accepted her apology because holding on to her piece of the mess didn't matter anymore. The wreckage belonged to Rowan and me. At work, Ethan didn't say anything at first. He kept glancing over the top of his monitor like he was waiting to see if I'd break. When I didn't, he finally walked over and sat on the edge of my desk. "You look like someone who survived a crash," he said. In a way, I did. He studied me for a long moment. "You don't seem relieved." "I'm not sure that's the right word," I said. "It's more like clarity." "Is that better?" I didn't know. Maybe clarity isn't better. Maybe it just hurts cleaner. I told him a little. Enough for context, not enough for everything. Ethan didn't press. He just nodded, like someone who'd seen the end of love before and knew there was no correct way to talk about it. That night, after leaving the office, I drove to Cary Park. The sky was bruised purple, the Seattle skyline stretching out in lights and fog. The Space Needle glowed like a lighthouse for people who didn't know which direction they were heading. I stood with my hands in my pockets, breathing air that tasted like rain. For the first time in weeks, My chest didn't feel like it was being pried open. Sabrina texted me a simple, "Are you okay?" Not, "Do you need me?" Not, "Can we talk?" Just a question. Gentle, careful, respectful of whatever space this moment required. I didn't reply right away. I let the phone slip back into my pocket and looked out over the city. Somewhere beneath those clouds, Rowan was sitting alone in her temporary apartment, facing the pieces of herself she had spent years avoiding. And somewhere across town, Sabrina was giving me room to breathe. Something Rowan had never quite learned how to do. The truth settled slowly, like sediment in water. Sabrina wasn't the beginning of the end. She was the mirror that showed me what I had become. Lonely, small, invisible in my own marriage. Rowan shattered us, but I let the fracture spread by choosing silence. Maybe both things can be true at once. The wind picked up, brushing cold against my collar. The city kept moving below me. Cars weaving through streets, ferries gliding across the bay, people laughing somewhere I couldn't see. Life didn't pause for heartbreak. It never had. When I finally pulled out my phone again, I typed a reply to Sabrina. "I'm okay, just figuring out what comes next." She sent back one sentence. "Whatever it is, start with breathing." I smiled, small but real. And for the first time, the thought of tomorrow didn't feel like a weight pressing down on my ribs. The marriage was over long before either of us admitted it. It died in overlooked moments, in quiet resentments, in jokes told to people who weren't meant to hear them. The dinner, the phone, Sabrina's hand on my shoulder. Those weren't the cause. They were the reveal. I took one last look at the skyline, letting the cold settle into me without resistance. Maybe endings don't need to be loud. Maybe some endings are just honesty finally catching up. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, that was enough.